Hello. One thing I really wanted to do before the end of 2024 was I really wanted to do a sort of reading year in review, because I know that, like many people, I have a New Year's resolution to read more. I thought I'll share all the books I read in 2024, all of them, give you a chat and see if you can maybe find something new to read. So I do want to go on the record and say that none of this was sent to me for free or anything like that, and all opinions are my own, and they are just opinions. I did sort of put this in a semi-random order, so let's just jump in. I guess there's not really anything more to do, so let's start with this one. This is Benjamin Langley's Is She Dead in Your Dreams? This is a grief horror, which is a favourite genre of mine. It's hard to say much about this one without spoiling it. It's one of those. But what I can tell you is there's a lot of stuff about English folklore, which is something I actually don't know much about despite being a Brit. I did have some sort of cultural awareness about don't touch the shoes. There's a supernatural element to it, and there's a big folklore element. But all of that stuff is done right. It's not trying to be something that it isn't. It is just, it's what it is. It's a quick read, it's something you can sit down and read cover to cover and just get fully immersed in, preferably not late at night without the lights on and giving yourself nightmares afterwards. No, it wasn't sensible. Above all else, horror is my jam. Horror and thriller in particular. Mystery and all that stuff, but horror especially is a love of mine. I've read a lot of horror. Trying to get me to actually be properly unsettled or scared by horror is not the easiest thing to do anymore, but yeah, some of the stuff in this is really creepy. This is an absolutely fantastic book. With every book in this video, I'm going to be giving it a rating out of 5, solid 5. Absolutely fantastic book. Second one on the stack. This is Exiles of a Gilded Moon by Dustin Cummings. This is book 1 of the trilogy. I've just got my hands on book 2, so that'll tell you something. This is an epic SFF book, which is not my bag, and neither is books being this thick. Ordinarily, I would run an absolute mile from this. However, I bought this on a whim after seeing Dustin's interview on the Shadowspark podcast, because he seemed like a really interesting guy and he was talking about writing his books, and there seemed like a lot of interesting stuff going into it. And I thought, you know what? If I'm ever going to love sort of epic sci-fi fantasy, it's going to be this. It exceeded, my expectations were like pretty high, given the interview that I watched and some of the things that were said, but way up here. It way exceeded them. He did talk in his interview a lot about a whole load of culture-driven aspects to this book, and yeah, that's a really, really big theme I've never read or really seen any book talked about that's like that before. So I think that's really cool, and there's a lot of politics that goes with that, and I like that. That's always a big plus for me. The characters in this are really good, really interesting characters. The world building and the world itself is really interesting, really great world building. And despite the fact that this book is really big, like this is 500 odd pages, it doesn't feel like a super long book. And for me, that's really important. You know, I read horror and thrillers the vast majority of the time, and I'm very picky about book length, both as a writer and a reader, honestly, but especially as a reader. To get something like this and just read it and not have a problem with the length, yeah, I'm actually well impressed with that. I didn't realise quite how big it was when I bought it, and when it arrived I was thinking, I don't know, but this is definitely a 5 out of 5 on the list. This one is fantastic. Even if you don't read epic sci-fi fantasy, because I don't, I think just about everybody will find something to like in this book, and I really do mean that. Right, the next one. This might be my favourite read of the year. This is the Blink and Abernathy Adventures trilogy by Kutya. I hope I'm saying that right. This is a trilogy. I've only got the first paperback with me on this because I don't have 3 hands. This is a steampunk mystery. I didn't really originally realise it was steampunk, I just thought it was Victorian mystery, and I'm a bit of a sucker for things like that, so that spoke to me. I like a good mystery book that's like actually a proper mystery, and this was supposed to be like high stakes conspiracy. Just sort of right up my street. It's actually like really quite heavy steampunk, which I just didn't realise at the start, and I am totally here for that. It's done really, really well. It doesn't get bogged down and any of that, which you can probably tell by looking at the spine, but it doesn't get bogged down in all the mechanics and the science and all that nonsense. But the action sequences in this are ridiculously good. They're super cinematic. I remember leaving reviews for this. In all of them I said, like, this is cinematic, this could just so easily translate to screen, because it could. It's one of those that's almost like begging for a screen adaptation by somebody good. The characters in this, again, are really, really good. The main character, Blink, you get hints as to the big reveal in the 3rd book pretty early, but I don't know, it's just really well done. And Abernathy is a great character, probably my favourite in the book. It's really fun. It's just a really, really fun read. It's another one you can just sit down, read it cover to cover, and it's one of those where you can read the whole trilogy, put it down, pick it up and just read the whole thing again straight away. And again, politics, conspiracy, I like that stuff. So yeah, absolutely solid 5 out of 5. Read of the year, question mark? Absolutely get a hold of this trilogy. It's amazing. Okay, this one. This is Dark Dark Heart by Kaitlin Corvus. This is a thriller stroke murder mystery. Now, I'm going to be honest, I have a bit of a more than a bit of a love-hate relationship with this book, because there's so much I love about it and so much that irritates me at the same time. The first thing I will say is, this book is absolutely beautifully written. If you are looking to get craft tips on just like general prose and writing, and you want to study beautiful writing, just buy it. Straight up, just go and buy it now. The characters are extremely good. The dynamics between them are interesting. Really interesting. It's very naturalistic. There's a lot of great stuff going on there. I can't really fault any of that, but this might just be me missing something somewhere, like some reference to something, but I do feel like it's trying to be something it's not. I know that's maybe unfair, but that is how it feels to me. There are parts of this book I really, really love, and breadcrumbs that are left that I think are great, but there are parts of it that make me want to throw it across the room, and that's not a compliment. So giving this one a rating is really difficult, because I was so desperate to like it more than I did. I really wanted to love this book, and I didn't. If you want great prose, beautifully written, great characters, really interesting dynamics, look no further. I think the only fair rating to give this is a solid 3 out of 5. I just can't in good conscience put it any higher than that. Okay, the next one I actually don't have the paperbacks for, because I read this in advance as it was released on Patreon in chapters. And it is Nick Ripley's project Suncloud. I think his author name is technically Nicholas Ripley. I think it was book 1 of Project Suncloud, which is called A Winter for Doves. I've seen it talked about as both grimdark and sci-fi horror. What I really love about this book is it doesn't shy away from any of the subject matter. And, I mean, none of the books so far do, for what it's worth. None of the books on this list do. But that's something that I do find a lot in media, books, films, games, TV, whatever, is that they try and go for really tough subject matter, like, in Project Suncloud, one of the big themes of this book is the horrors of war, and they shy away from the actual true elements of that, and Project Suncloud doesn't do that, and I'm really glad that it doesn't, because it does tackle a lot of difficult stuff, and it just does it really, really well. The characters are great. They're really well written, they're interesting, they've got their flaws, they're very flawed characters, and at times they know that and they do things that people actually do. And despite the fact that it's a really long book, like the paperback is actually split into 2 volumes. Again, I read this advance on Patreon effectively as an ebook. it didn't feel long. I didn't feel the length at all. The pacing's great. The action, again, is just amazing. It is on par with Blank and Abernathy. The action is just really, really well done. Because there is a big horror and creature horror element to this, I wasn't sure, because creature horror in particular generally doesn't get me. I don't love that. But, yeah, Nick, you're a bit good at that. Solid 5 out of 5. Yep, solid book if you like grimdark, sci-fi, horror, any of those things. Okay, next up we have my other contender for favourite read of the year. This is another Benjamin Langley. This is Dead Branches. It's another horror. We got a bit of a theme going here. It's sort of split across two timelines. So you have not quite, but almost epigraphs in the sort of contemporary timeline, and then there's a lot of child POV, and that's how the majority of the book is. It's in child POV. And it's used, the way child POV is done in this book and how that influences the story is really, really clever. Genuinely one of those who are like, oh, but that makes so much sense, especially from the lens of reading this as an adult. It makes so much sense. It's very, very clever. I can't really talk about that at all because it would spoil this really badly. But it's one of those where it's not all spelled out. There's a lot of stuff in there about generational trauma and, you know, sort of burying of trauma and all of those sorts of things, but it's not spelled out explicitly. It's one of those where everything is handled really well. It's handled with care. It's really beautifully done. I've not read anything quite like it in that sort of sense, and I'm not convinced I ever will again. It's one of those where you just think, you end up staring at the blank pages in the back. You just think about it for a long time after finishing reading it. You really do. It's hard to say much about this book without spoiling it. Honestly, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I really can't. If you ever read a Benjamin Langley book, this is the one. I haven't read his entire back catalogue, but seriously, read this book. It's amazing. 5 out of 5, no questions. Absolutely fantastic. And we got another Corvus. This is her other standalone as of right now, The Long Way Down. And I wish I'd started reading Kaitlin with this book. I really wish I'd read this before Dark Dark Heart. If you know when you get those playlists that are, you know, quintessential John Coltrane or quintessential Frank Sinatra, this is the one I feel like is sort of quintessential Kaitlin Corvus. If you read a Kaitlin Corvus book, if you just want to read one, see if you like her, I would say this is the one. It's absolutely beautifully written. Again, Caitlin's writing just has that magic touch in the prose. It's just a very solid thriller. It's a very urban, working class, but North America's. And it's immersive in that you do get immersed in the sort of culture and the environment and all of that. That said, I really hate to say this, I do, but again, I just didn't love it. And I can't really tell you why. The only thing I can really think of on this one is maybe pacing, but given the sort of writing that Kaitlin does, that does feel a little bit unfair. I mean, again, if you want beautiful writing, here's your book. Get it. But yeah, again, I can't really give this above a 3 out of 5. It feels cruel to give it any less, because it is beautifully done, and there's not really anything explicitly wrong with it, but I don't feel I can give it anything higher either, so I'm not gonna. And now I'm gonna talk about something very, very different. I mean, it's pretty much chalk and cheese from the last one. This is All of Me, Volume 5 by Richard Charles Stevens. And this one is poetry, actually, and I'm not poetry buff, like, at all, so I'm not gonna tell you that I fully got it, because I didn't. So yeah, poetry, not something I really read. Not something I ever really think about reading. But this one has this whole theme about imagination and the sort of depths of the mind and soulful and spirituality and all of these things, and absolutely nailed all that. It's really beautiful. It's In a lot of places very emotional, in a lot of places it can be really quite motivating as well. Again, I'm really not a poetry person at all, so I don't really know the language to use, or the terminology or anything, but I can just tell you, even if you don't read poetry, I don't, it's a great book. Even if you only get like the surface level of it, and some of it I understand on a more deep level, some of it I don't really have that. I'd need to do another read of this book, and that is something I plan on doing because I do feel like I'm missing stuff. It's still just really solid. I really enjoyed it. It evoked the things in me that I wanted it to. 5 out of 5. Whether you like poetry or whether you don't, if spirituality is something that means something to you, if you like the sort of philosophical elements of life, you'll like this. Let's move to another chalk and cheese, shall we? Heritage of Blood and Magic by Mirna Chandrakumar. I again hope I'm saying that right. This is a YA dark fantasy, which is something I would usually run a mile from. Like seriously, this is like YA dark fantasy, I see that and I just go, ugh. But I took a punt on this one, and not just because there's a character named after me, that's an in-joke. This was written by a dear friend of mine, Mirna, and I gotta say, it's fun. It's a fun book, it's very well written. There's a lot of really great characters in there. It's one of those where you're like, if you've ever liked any YA fantasy book, this is... Again, look no further, this is your book, buy it. You'll love this. Book 2's out now, book 3 should be coming early 2025, I believe, is when it's slated for, I don't know. What I really like about this book is not just hating Daylon, although I do love to hate him. There is a very strong female friendship, front and centre, with the main characters, and I really like how that's done. It's very genuine, and I value that. I think that's good to have in fiction in general because there's not enough of that, but I think that's really good for YA in particular. I will say I didn't love this book, but as I said right at the top of this segment, YA dark fantasy is not my bag. It's not. I mean, I read the book and I know that just about anybody else will love this, it's just not for me. In terms of giving this one a rating, it's kind of difficult because, yeah, I guess I'll give this a solid 4 out of 5. Because I'm very conscious that I think there are ways I could love this. And I think that's basically, if it was written more of as an adult book, I think I would absolutely love this. But it's not, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with this book in any way, shape or form. It's just not for me, and I feel like it's disingenuous to give something that I didn't fully enjoy 5 out of 5. If you've ever liked fantasy, especially YA fantasy, get this. This is a book I have had on my list for a while to read, and was always a bit tentative about reading it, so I didn't until very late 24. This is the first in the Guy Fawkes Demon Hunter trilogy. It's called A Clangour of Bells, and it is book number 3 from Benjamin Langley on this list. I don't know if you can tell, but I like this man's writing rather a lot. So yeah, I wasn't sure about this one because I'd heard it described as The Evil Dead meets British history. And The Evil Dead, I know it's a beloved, but it's Benjamin Langley. And I thought, if anybody's gonna make me love that, it's gonna be him. And I do have a bit of a thing for his fic. Honestly, I'd never really thought about it, but I do. I do like a bit of historical fiction. I love good horror. I like politics and conspiracy. I like good action sequences and, sort of tasteful violence that's done well, and great characters and character dynamics and torn loyalties and all those things, and this book has all of that. I mean, that's the long and short, is it has basically everything I love in it. It's written by a super talented author. I was not just pleasantly surprised but impressed with this one in particular, because I wasn't expecting really to like it. I kept my expectations low on this one, and there was no need to do that. It is actually really good, it's really entertaining. Again, it doesn't shy away from things. Things are taken seriously, things are handled well, and if anything, I'm the idiot for ever doubting that it would be anything but brilliant. That's the long and short of it. 5 out of 5. Langley doesn't miss. Alright, we've made it, folks. Last book on the list, but certainly not the least. It's massive. Seriously, it's massive. This is Shadow Sparks' 2024 anthology, Cozyish. And I'm not going to do a rundown of the entire thing because it's like over 600 pages. Genuinely, some of the people behind the scenes had to check and see whether we could actually print this book. It's so big. I'm not going to run you through every single story, although I will say, everybody who contributed to this, holy moly, they are talented people. Seriously, and it's a great way of introducing yourself to new authors without having to commit to books that are 500 odd pages as individual stories. You know, it's quite an easy hop in, hop out book. None of the individual stories are actually that long. I'm going to take 4 stories that I thought were absolutely outstanding. Undine Summer by Ashley Anglin is the one I'm going to start with. And this is, I believe she calls her work Slipstream now, which for those that don't know is sort of sci-fi fantasy. She often ties in sort of threads of climate fiction and things like that. This story, if I remember correctly, doesn't really feature the climate fiction side of things though. It's just a very sweet, wholesome, just absolutely stunning writing. Beautifully, beautifully done. And it's fun. And it's got a lot of deep threads with sort of family and all of those sorts of things, and family being difficult because it is, but it's handled really well. It's also child POV, and I think the POV character is really interesting, and her POV is interesting, and yeah, beautifully done. Stunning work, Ashley. Well done. Another one that is also beautifully written, and in a similar sort of way, actually, is, I don't know how to say this, Salem Bridge. This is by Mariah Norris. Gonna be honest, I don't know exactly how to label this one genre-wise. I guess it's like just literary fiction. I guess, I'm not entirely sure. This was one that actually Ashley described as saying it's one that you could see on screen and Netflix should pick this up, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. It would be absolutely beautiful and beautifully done as just like a Netflix short film, or just a single episode, maybe? I don't know, something like that. But again, just beautifully, beautifully written, beautiful settings, super evocative, you can really see it, and you just know you're seeing it exactly as the author intended as well, which I think is nicely done, but it does that without getting bogged down in description, which is like #1 pet peeve of mine. It doesn't do that, and that's a real testament of skill to the writer on that one. Like, emotional, this one has a lot of theming and threads around grief, and again, handled absolutely beautifully. Threads on belonging and finding your place in the world, sort of, and all of those sorts of things, and where your place in the world is, and it's lovely to read, it's beautiful to read, I can't recommend that story highly enough, honestly. Would I buy the anthology just for that one story? Number 3 I want to talk about is Cemetery Sweetheart, and this is by M.A. Phillips. And this is definitely the coziest of all the stories. This is just basically a straight romance, I think. And it's very sweet. It's one of those stories that's just really beautiful, really wholesome. It's one of those where you're like, you'd almost feel like it was a privilege to see it if it was real. It's one of those. It's another one that could actually translate really well to like a short film on screen. It's hard to say much about this one without spoilers. It's one of those. But I will say, again, beautiful scenery, beautifully done, and reincarnation is a big theme in that one, and again, props on that one. That's always going to win points with me. And last, but certainly not least, we have a piece by Kori Valley called The Man Who Came with Winter. And this is a sort of epic fantasy. It's definitely on the ish side of cozy. This was an absolutely stunning read. Again, epic fantasy? No, I run a mile from that. But my goodness, is Kori good at what he does. It's one of those where, because it's that sort of classic fantasy feel, the prose itself is just, it envelops you in that it's very evocative, it's very cozy prose. But it's epic fantasy that doesn't get bogged down in description, and I really value that. I really, really do. It's very evocative without that being weighed down. The prose is just really well done. The characters are really well done. A lot of the setting is really nice. I really like the setting and the time period and all of that sort of stuff. And I've got in all caps here, Broma. Broma is the name of one of the characters. If you watch the Shadowspark Publishing podcast, there we did do an episode about the anthology, and I openly admitted to being, Broma's #1 fan. I love that character so much, and Kori, if you hurt him, I'm going to be very angry with you. Kori's work, absolutely stunning. I mean, the anthology overall is just a collation of amazing talent. There are so many people who are so talented in here, and they've all written really good stories. You're bound to find at least 3, if not 6 pieces that you love in this, no matter who you are. So I'm going to run you through the full list of authors that are in here. We got Ashley Anglin, who's Undine Summer, who I talked about. We've got Erika McCorkle, probably best known for Merchants of Knowledge and Magic. M.A. Phillips, Cemetery Sweetheart, talked about that one. Salem Wolf, Kori Valley, The Man Who Came with Winter, talked about him. Valerie Storm, best known for Demon Storm, her story is directly related to that. Kaitlin Corvus, who I've mentioned earlier. Mariah Norris, the Salem Bridge. Azshure Raine, best known for probably her upcoming book, honestly, That Time I Was Kidnapped by the Faking. Eric Avedissian, who probably best known for the Martyr's Vow series. Kassidy Coursey, who upcoming has her book series Sins of the Maker, that's starting to come out in 2025. And me! I was in this one as well. I wrote a piece here, so if that's an extra incentive to get this, then... So now the main stuff is out of the way. Those are all my reads of 2024. I want to talk about some books I'm really excited to read in 2025. Some of these are coming out actually really quite early in the year, which is part of the reason I wanted to tell you about these, because New Year's reading goals and all those sorts of things. But also 2025 is looking like a crazy year for indie books, and I'm really excited, genuinely. So, let's get straight into this. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Dance of Demons. This is by Alyssa Lauseng. I have read some of Alyssa's books before. The Keeper trilogy is available now. Highly recommend. I didn't read it this year, though. Dance of Demons is the first in the Poison and Opium series, and it's honestly maybe the thing that Alyssa's best known for at this point. It's a very dark fantasy. It's set in a sort of feudal Japan-inspired world, which is big ups for me. Love that. The characters in this I know a lot about, and they're fantastic characters, and it's sort of, in many ways, set concurrent, in terms of timelines, or concurrently with the Keeper trilogy, and the Keeper trilogy was a really great story. I really enjoyed it. So sort of seeing a different perspective, a different side of things that was happening, that's something I'm really excited to see. Can't wait for this book. Really hyped for this. I got very high expectations, and I know Alyssa's going to meet them. It's coming in March 2025, so this is one you can get hyped for coming pretty quick. Next one I've got here is Aberration, again by Nicholas Ripley. This is not Project Suncloud related, this is a standalone. I believe this is slated for late 2025, perhaps November. This is a standalone, this is a psychological horror. And I love me a psychological horror. It's one of those ones I haven't seen that much talk about yet, because I get the impression it's very hard to talk about that book without massive spoilers. But it's going to be one of those it's gritty, it's psychological, it's, again, a lot of interesting, very flawed characters with interesting dynamics. That seems to be a Ripley trademark. I'm really, really looking forward to this one. This one I just know is going to be right up my street. It's by a talented writer. Number 3 on this list is actually a book I've done an interview about. This is Our Own Unique Affliction by Scott J. Moses. And this one is coming really quickly. This one's a January 2025. I am really excited for this book. It's a grief horror. It's also a vampire horror. Yeah, if you want the full details on this, I think it's probably best said by Scott himself. There is an interview episode, so I do have a playlist on the channel of AEP interviews. It's very easy to find. There is a little snippet reading as well. Grief horror, big fan, and I've been wanting to read a vampire book that's not a romance. Like a vampire book that has a different take on things, because there's so much vampire romance out there and I'm just not interested in that. And that's not because of Twilight, I'm just genuinely just not interested in that at all. I'm not really a romance reader. I don't like the take on vampires that seems to be just the way that they're handled in romance. I don't like it. Scott's take, I'm just really interested in. This is a book I didn't really know much about before I interviewed Scott, so he has basically sold this to me himself. I love grief horror. It's right up my street, and I can't wait, and it's coming really soon, so that's awesome. Another book I'm really hyped for, this is late 2025, this is in November. This is Winds of the World by a certain Kori Valley. And yeah, epic fantasy. I believe as it stands the book is like 300,000 words, which is that's long. I mean, it's going to be like 600 odd pages long, if not more than that. Not my usual bag, but having read The Man Who Came with Winter, I want to read more by Kori Valley, dude. I really do. He's a very interesting person. I've had talks with him on the Shadow Spot podcast at various points. He's very interesting. There's a whole big thread on philosophy. He bills it as philosophical fantasy, which is very interesting to me. A lot of it's very gritty, a lot of it's very grim. I love a bittersweet story, I really do. I like emotional damage, I like politics, I like gritty stories. I really can't wait for this book because I think it's going to be something very different for me, and different in a really good way that I'm really hyped for. And last but certainly not least on this list, I'm actually kind of cheating to include it. So that tells you enough about how into this book I am. This is Hell is Work by Zed Prosporo. I am sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but this book does not have a slated release date. I'm not convinced it's done, but my goodness am I hyped for this. This is, I don't know how to give this a particular genre. I guess I want to call it a fantasy comedy, but that feels disingenuous because I know it tackles some really dark stuff as well. But it is definitely a fantasy, I can give you that. It's been described by Zed as Good Omens meets The Office. I really like the tone of the humour in this. I really like the characters. I like a lot of the world building, and it's about the sort of bureaucracy of hell, and the main character is... I really like him. Like, he is an arsehole. He is a definitive arsehole, but I really like him. I think he's a really good character, I think he's really interesting, and I'm just really excited to read this book whenever it's done, however it's published. I want it. Whenever it comes out, you bet I'm buying a copy on day one. That might be everything. So this has been something very different. I don't usually have a face cam, so if you found my voice really incongruous with my face, if you've been on this channel before, don't worry about it, I do as well. I do plan on doing this effectively every year. I'd like to do a 2025 reads for Christmas. We'll see if whether that happens or not, because I'll be dealing with pre-orders for my second book at that point, so no guarantees that'll happen before about this upload time again. But I'm going to be reading a lot in 2025. I've got paperbacks lined up that I want to read, and I've got my eyes on quite a few things that you've just heard, and I'm also doing something else that requires a lot of reading. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, so I'm not going to, but it's something that's very exciting, and after the fact, when everything is done, I will be able to talk about things. But I think that's about all for now. There will be links to all of the talent, all of the books, and people's social media handles in the description. So if you want to get hold of these books, which I highly, highly, highly recommend, go ahead and do that. Give these people a follow on socials so that you stay up to date with their writing plans and what they're doing. Well worth your time. Of course, I'm also on social media. I'm at JBlack21 or Jade_Black21, depending on the platform, but it's pretty universal. I am Here on YouTube, I host a writing podcast. The majority of the time I interview writers on occasion. A lot of it is about the sort of craft, what goes into writing a story, sometimes trope talk, whatever I really feel like. It's often goes on quite deep dives, on tangents, on those sorts of things. So if you want a writing podcast that's not just query advice, which is what many of them seem to be, if you want one that's actually about proper writing, you're in the right place. Give the channel a sub, and then you won't miss things when they next come. In terms of social media platforms I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Pinterest. So you can give me a follow in any of those sorts of places. Instagram is sort of indie book hype / podcast home. Twitter is my writing home. That's where you'll get semi-live updates on whatever I'm doing. And maybe goat gifs. Who knows? Blue Sky is a bit of a game dev place. I'm not there very often because I don't have that much time for game dev, but that's what I do on there. Pinterest is my art hub, and there's some stuff about world building on there too, so you can kind of sort of see what the places I write about look like. But that is about all for today. So I hope you've enjoyed me doing something a little different, and I hope you have found a book that you're excited to read that's coming this year, or one that's from previous years that you want to get your hands on, and have a wonderful rest of your day.